We're going to be unpacking the politics of the day as the Prime Minister waters down early prison release before heading off on his holidays. We'll ask whether we've lost the art of talking to each other. I hope not, otherwise this is going to be a pretty dull 45 minutes. Joining me in the studio is the Times' James Marriott. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you. I feel like I should reply laconically and refuse to engage with you.
I know, I thought about that joke as well, but it doesn't work on the radio.
It doesn't really, no, it really doesn't. I was trying to work out how to do it. But here I am chatting, as I'm employed to do.
Can you please shut up? You're just going on and on and on. I want to introduce the Times.
No, that's rude.
The Times' Charlotte Ivers, who's also with us. Hello, Charlotte.
Hello, I've never been accused of having too few words, if anything quite the opposite, so I'm happy to cover for James for the next hour or so.
Excellent. James, you just lie back and think about your column. Let's begin with Andy Burnham's partial U-turn on the early prison release scheme. Criminals convicted of rape, grooming offences and child sexual assault will no longer be eligible for early release, although people serving time for manslaughter and serious domestic abuse will. That means that the two of PC Andrew Harper's killers could still be freed in January. The Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has been speaking this morning.
Never ever under Conservatives did we have the early release of rapists, paedophiles or killers. Yes, we did have an early release for people who'd served 2/3 of their sentence, not people who'd served or half their sentence, not people who served 1/3 of their sentences, and definitely not paedophiles, not rapists, not killers. In 14 years of Conservative government, there was an early release of about 10,000 prisoners. We have had 60,000 released under Labour in just 2 years. You cannot compare the two situations.
So this is a big problem, I think, for Andy Burnham, particularly the release of the two killers of PC Andrew Harper. I suspect that the Prime Minister will do a U-turn on this, Charlotte, and I suspect that the public is really angry.
Well, he's already semi-U-turning, isn't he? I find this one really tricky. Every now and again you get one of those problems in government where you think, gosh, I'm really glad that's not me making that choice, because it does seem like a pretty intractable situation. I was listening to some government minister or other on the radio earlier today who was talking about what will happen to these people who are released early, and it's not like they're just thrown back out onto the high street. They are going to have reasonably restrictive conditions put on them, so they're all going to be tagged there. Many of them will be under house arrest, which is good, I think, and does make me feel better about this if it works, exactly, because there was a thing, wasn't there, I think earlier this year, that I'm going to possibly botch this number, but it was around 7,000 people who were meant to have tags on them just didn't.
Exactly.
So, this is the eternal question, will it actually work?
Absolutely. The sympathy with the government, James, is obviously that nobody's built any prisons for the last 20 years. This is sort of insoluble problem. But the other thing that irritates me about this is it seems to me we're completely missing the point, which is that we lock too many people up in this country.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think prisons is the issue on which I'm wokest. But I think my woke stance on prisons is a hard sell to the general public. And I think prisons are one of those areas. Democracies do some things very well. Other things are incredibly difficult to do in democracy. And I think finding a solution to prisons is one of them, because for one thing, I think we know that looking at other countries, what seems to work is this kind of Scandinavian model of rehabilitation, of treating prisoners well. That's obviously incredibly unpalatable to the electorate. Building prisons is very unpalatable to the electorate. If you are forced into a position about how to spend money, do you want a new hospital? Do you want a prison? Do you want to improve your hospital? Do you want to improve your prison? Prisoners can't vote. People don't feel an awful lot of sympathy with prisoners, and people don't want life to be better for them. So therefore you don't build prisons. Therefore you end up in this situation, as you say, 20 years down the road, where there are no prisons, and the options appear to be overfill the prisons and watch them collapse into chaos, or release prisoners. And it's one of those fascinating areas where democracies just don't seem to be particularly well equipped as a political system to handle this. Yeah,
because prisoners and prisons are the bottom of the political tree. There's nothing in it for you when you go and vote at the ballot box. You're not talking about a tax cut. But the early release policy is being presented as the new Prime Minister's policy. He's putting himself centre stage again, but he himself is off on holiday. His aides reportedly wanted the Prime Minister to have a break following a busy few months, and he has travelled to an undisclosed location with his family. I don't know if I can out-woke you, James, but I'm all in favour of the Prime Minister having a holiday. It seems totally sensible.
My God, this is my wokest week ever. This is my other. Is it a woke opinion to think that politicians should have a break?
I don't think that's a woke opinion. I think that's sort of an elitist establishment. How dare you plebeians?
It is a kind of
criticise us. An Englishman has a right to a lovely Caribbean holiday.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that angle.
Yeah. This is the elite looking after themselves.
Oh, I see. So we're now talking down to people by saying that, a 2-week break on the French Riviera is standard.
It's the absolute right of our rulers, and how dare anybody be angry about it.
So James is pro-holiday. And Charlotte?
You can tell I'm reasonably anti-holiday here. I'm not anti-Prime Minister's holidays in general, but I am anti-Prime Ministers who've been Prime Minister for all of about 10 days going on holiday. I mean, if he's tired now after a by-election and then a few weeks of faffing, what's he going to be like in a year? It's terrible.
Well, I mean, the by-election would have taken a lot out of him, and then he had to form a government.
Delivering some leaflets.
And then he had to do a lot of TikTok videos.
Well, exactly. That, true.
He's knackered. I mean, it does strike me that we will drive sort of politics. I mean, the thing I find the most bizarre is that you get elected on a Thursday evening, Friday morning. You go down to Downing Street. You form your government on 1 hour's sleep, and then you've got to be hard at it straight away. You know, American presidents get a break. They get elected in November.
Andy Burnham got a bit of a break, didn't he? And he wanted longer, but Keir Starmer quite reasonably said to him, Keir Starmer's people said to him, sorry, if you conduct a coup, you don't get to then go, oh, would you mind looking after the country for a few months? So he has had a little bit of a gap to sort out what he's doing.
Come back, James, and justify the holiday. I think Charlotte's been, driven in hard here.
Yeah, I think Charlotte's being very harsh and very unwoke about all this. It just seems obvious. I think the thing that really alarms me about the current state of politics is that there's this really kind of depressing, punitive attitude towards politicians, where we want all our politicians to suffer in front of us because we despise the idea of a political elite or a political establishment. Sorry, you can't run a democracy without one. We don't want them to go on nice trains. We want them to suffer in second class. And I think for our self-respect as a country, our politicians have to have a little bit of, they have to be treated somewhat well. And also, I don't want the country run by some poor, sleep-deprived bloke who's being on a constant schedule of uploading videos to TikTok. He's trying to reform prisons. He's done this by-election. I just think it's incredibly self-defeating to think that politicians should just perform superhumanly and be punished in front of us constantly. They should be able to relax. They should have a nice time. They have difficult jobs. And if you want democracy to work, you've got to treat politicians well, even though that, I'm aware, is another unpopular opinion.
I completely agree with you on this, James. So let's gang up on Charlotte, because I also think it must be fascinating to be in Andy Burnham's head at the moment and realise that everything you do is now a matter of public discussion. His paunch is now a matter of public discussion. Going on holiday is a matter of public discussion. When we find out where he's gone on holiday, that's going to be a matter of public discussion, because obviously the emphasis, clever Prime Minister's holiday in the Scilly Isles or somewhere like that. I mean, it's quite interesting that literally everything he does now will be a matter of public debate.
Yes, it's terrible, isn't it? If only he could have foreseen that by becoming Prime Minister, such things would happen to him.
Sympathy. She's
well, look, it's not going to be.
She's not giving any quarter.
It's not going to be a great holiday, is it? That's the kind of sadness of it. I kind of feel for Andy Burnham's wife in this, in that she's been offered a lovely holiday, and he's obviously going to be on his Zoom calls every second of every day. And in a way, it would almost be better just not to try, and she could have a nice holiday with the kids and leave him at home. I think I'd find it quite annoying if I was her.
Yes, I never switch off on holidays, so I think I should be Prime Minister. Didn't get any reaction there from my columnist.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to come back and talk about whether we can unite James, Charlotte and myself, but whether we can unite the right, which is the big challenge facing the country at the moment. Westminster's favourite Will They, Won't They continues. Of course, we are talking about Rupert and Nigel. Will they get it together? Rupert-Lowe and Nigel Farage. Farage has raised the prospect of the pair making some kind of deal at yesterday's press conference, saying he was willing to negotiate with Rupert-Lowe after the Restore leader made an offer to unite based on 5 principles, including a referendum on bringing back the death penalty. Nigel Farage spoke to Kate Borsay on Times Radio last night.
I'm always prepared to put past differences, shall we say, I'm understating that, but to put past differences aside in the interest of getting some sort of unity. So look, I'm not closing the door on it, but I'm just sort of slightly questioning what the deal is. Because it seems that...
Well, he's already accused you of lying today, hasn't he?
Which is extraordinary. It's absolutely an extraordinary thing to have done. I'm not going to return the compliment, other than to say, he's not a very easy person to deal with, but if there is a chat to be had, I will have that chat.
This is sort of fascinating on so many levels, Charlotte. I mean, listening to that Nigel Farage interview, it is like kind of listening into your parents arguing or something. It's like it's a terrible soap opera, but it also comes at a point where Reform appeared to be declining in the polls. The extraordinary ability of Restore to get a kind of certain share of the vote wherever an election is taking place. So it seems to me the pressure is all on Reform. The Overton window shifted. It was previously the pressure on the Tories, you're going to unite with Reform. Now the pressure was in Reform to unite with Restore.
Yeah, what a thing. Every time I see a by-election result or a poll which has Restore kind of bouncing around, it's kind of 7%, 9% high, one figures, you think, what?
I know,
like,
I think more.
Yeah, it's one man and a dog, and the one man is a sort of like, middle-aged bloke, Rupert Lowe, that kind of, I think, well, he's quite good at social media. You always hear conspiracy theories. He's got some whiz kid 21-year-old getting on social media. And
he's amplified by Elon Musk.
Which, I'm always wary of saying, oh, yes, no, it's because he's got the XYZ powerful man who's pushing him. But it's so striking to me how important social media is, and what a boring thing to say, because social media has been important for so long, but how important it is, but also how siloed, because I don't really see any Rupert Lowe content on my Twitter feed. I see quite a lot of like quite nut stuff and quite right-wing stuff. I'm not conflating the two of those. But there are clearly people who are getting an awful lot of this, and I'm not seeing any of it. And the demographics.
I'm fascinated there hasn't been a sort of deep dive into who are the Restore voters.
Yeah, I would guess that they're sort of young men, and they are kind of middle-aged people, or late middle-aged people, I would say. That tends to be the demographic that Reform have been going for, so it wouldn't surprise me if that basically Restore are getting a slightly more hardline and slightly more high information specifically on the big topic they care about, which is immigration, demographic of there. Also people who love social media, both of those two groups. So that would be my guess.
But I mean, the fundamental point here is that these two people are not going to unite. I mean, they hate each other, and we're just going to have to be bystanders as they keep giving these sort of slightly bizarre interviews about their passive-aggressive relationship.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to be a bystander for this. It's quite good fun. It seems like a slightly sort of unrealistic idea to me, considering the circumstances in which Rupert Lowe was kicked out of Reform with the accusations of bullying, and him saying that Nigel Farage suffered from tall poppy syndrome and couldn't bear to have another big personality next to him, which, by the way, is clearly true, which is another reason they will never, ever get back together. I slightly wonder if I was Nigel Farage, I wouldn't necessarily be overly worried about Restore in the long term. I think they're in the news because more people are voting for them. They're cropping up in polls more. Something similar happened to the Green Party when Zach Polansky became leader. They were suddenly cropping up in the polls more. This always attracts more scrutiny. Zach Polansky's personal approval ratings are declining, and it looks like there is a way to outmaneuver him if you're Andy Burnham. And I kind of wonder maybe something similar will happen to Restore. I mean, they've spent the early part of their political career being taken as a kind of joke. Now we're all astonished they're doing so well. The next phases, I suspect, aren't a lot of the people at this party are standing as candidates a little bit nuts, and therefore they maybe won't look like such a threat. And actually Nigel Farage's long-term political strategy, which has been to detoxify Reform, to try and not always entirely successfully get non-mad people to stand as candidates, may be vindicated, and I think Restore may have a lot of those traps ahead of it that will cause it problems in the polls.
Yeah, I think you are right. I mean, I think Farage has made the point, which is a sensible point to make almost as an objective political commentator, which is when it comes to the election, people will come back to Reform because they'll be thinking about who do I want in government. So it is odd, because Restore is like the protest vote against Reform, when the voters will return when it gets serious.
Yeah, possibly true, although there are a lot of people who vote Green and don't vote Labour in general elections, aren't there? So
more and more, yeah.
Yeah, not necessarily something that will automatically happen. I guess it's all about the messaging that Reform can project when it comes to the general election, and obviously they've got the Conservatives on the other side of them as well, so they have the potential for that kind of double-sided crunch on their numbers, and they'll have to work out how to appeal to both Restore voters, but also the sort of middle-ish, moderate-y, but right-ish conservative who might consider voting for them because they're annoyed, but would probably be quite turned off by some of the kind of mass deportations, for example, that Restore are very keen on.
Absolutely. Let's talk about education, because there's been a lot of anger from the Conservatives about how the Education Secretary, Lucy Powell, has criticised Michael Gove, who hasn't been Education Secretary for 12 years, but he seems to be the target. Lucy Powell wrote in the Times yesterday that Gove's policy of forcing schools to prioritise academic learning has resulted in more NEETs, describing it as a direct consequence of his reforms. It seems to me, James, that this is completely nonsense, this point.
Yeah, I think it is total nonsense. The obvious point that people have been making is that Wales, for instance, didn't have these reforms, and the NEET problem in Wales is as high, if not worse, than it is in England. So the data just doesn't bear this out. I mean, I'm sure it's a sort of political talking point that will make sense to a lot of people, but it's not a reflection of reality.
I mean, you're an academic.
I think probably anybody who's met me would say that it's fair to say I'm not an electrician or adept
Do you have
at anything.
Strong views about parity of esteem between vocational and academic education?
Yeah, I do actually, and I'm strongly influenced. There's a great Substack blog I'd recommend to anyone listening by Daisy Christodoulou, which is worth looking up, about this issue of parity of esteem. And she makes the brilliant point that I think one of the problems in education at the moment has been that a lot of middle-class commentators doing academic knowledge work jobs tend to assume that jobs like being an electrician or being a plumber are where you can put the least talented pupils, and people who aren't very good at GCSEs and aren't very good at maths or English, maybe they'll be better off being an electrician or a plumber. Daisy quite rightly points out that being an electrician or a plumber requires a great deal of intelligence and is in some ways quite an academic job. If you want to be an electrician, you need to know trigonometry. There's a huge handbook to learn. So I think some of what's distorting this debate is this slightly out of touch feeling that everyone who can't do GCSEs, they can just go and become an electrician, which I think is actually quite rude to electricians. I think that's a difficult job that also requires intelligence. She says that insofar as this stuff has been studied, academic ability correlates with manual ability. There's actually not you're one or the other. Those two things go together. So that's my view.
Very thick. But I think that's a very insightful point. That if we beat ourselves up that we don't give parity of esteem for technical education, but of course the mantra is we need a technical route for people who can't handle, in inverted commas, the academic route. It should be completely the opposite, a bit like choosing Olympic athletes. You should test people's aptitude and you can say to a 10 or 11-year-old whose parents might think, that person could become a lawyer. Now, actually, this person could be a very talented electrician. Let's set them down that path.
Yeah, and I think the idea of it being a can't handle is probably wrong. I'm wary of the idea we should give up entirely on academic routes before the age of 16. And what I quite like about this policy is the idea there'll be a bit of a combination. So you'll still get your maths, your English, and a couple of other things, because I do think that academic elements, academic study has a value for everybody, whatever their job is, and that's kind of part of it, isn't it? Plumbers can also read the Russian novels. This is something that enriches everybody's life, and I think there needs to not be this sense that, okay, yes, we're all very serious about technical education now, but that means that we almost don't need to worry about reading great novels or being good at maths if you're a plumber. No, everybody needs to have a bit of a sense of both, I think.
Well, it goes back to sort of C.P. Snow to a certain extent, and these two cultures. But it took me a while to work out what the sort of Gove-Powell row was about. But it was about reforming technical education to raise the standard, not to compromise, not to say... I think Gove's view is that a lot of the technical qualifications are just very low grade. And so he doesn't have a problem with technical education, although he did say... welcome back to stupid or something on the basis that Lucy Powell wanted it. He wants to improve it, but it wasn't necessarily his focus when he was Education Secretary. That perhaps was the missing piece of the jigsaw. He was right to emphasise reading, writing, arithmetic,
which, by the way, are all dramatically improved, but I think not
Yes.
in Wales and not in Scotland.
Correct.
That does tell us something.
But that surely is probably the way forward, to raise the quality of technical education, and that's how you get parity of esteem. You can't just impose parity of esteem.
Yes, I think that's definitely true. And Lucy Powell has kind of wound me up quite a lot in the last couple of days with her sort of talk about undue focus on academic skills. And there's this story about her that I think is incredibly revealing. So she, at the age of 18 or whatever, and I'm always very wary of judging people for what they do at 18, because Lord knows I would not want to be judged, and everyone's a bit awful at 18. But she goes off to Oxford or Cambridge, and she gets there and she sort of decides that everything's a bit snobby and that she doesn't feel very smart here and people are making her feel thick. So she goes off to, I think, King's, which is a perfectly functional, very good university in London, and she has a much better time there because she feels smart. And you think, right, okay, there's probably some sort of class element there. It is easier if you are an arrogant Etonian to swan into Oxford and feel great about yourself. For everyone else, you do have a bit of an element of, gosh, I was the smartest kid at my school and now I'm surrounded by people who are smarter than me. And that is not a pleasant feeling. It is an incredibly good learning experience for the smart kid at school not to be the smartest kid in the room, and to work out how you work around that and how you learn to respect other people's intelligence, how you learn to respect your own intelligence in that context. And I think it's a massive character failing to walk away from that because you don't feel smart enough. That said, obviously, as I said, she was 18. They're actually still boasting about it now. That's a bit pathetic.
I can't bear the sort of Monty Python-esque tone that Labour politicians take about how difficult they found life. You know, Andy Burnham felt like a fish out of water in Cambridge. I was very struck by an interview with Kanishka Narayan, who's the AI minister, who comes from a very humble background, Indian parents, grew up in Wales, but got a scholarship to Eton. Doesn't hide the fact. Very proud of the fact he went to a fantastic school.
This is such a good story. So his parents basically brought him and his brother over when they were quite young with absolutely nothing, and he I think he had a really good teacher who said to him, "You're too smart. You need to be getting scholarships somewhere." He googled what's the best school, and he got Eton. And they had the local dentist who drove him up for his interview, and people were clubbing together to buy him his uniform, even though he got a full bursary because he couldn't afford it. And what really struck me, I mean, my husband did this interview, hence I'm kind of intimately acquainted with it. I'm not just obsessed with this new AI.
Did I say it was one of the best interviews I've read?
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. But I mean, he sort of came home from doing this interview with this guy, sort of buzzing, because he was like, wow, this man genuinely believes that Britain's best days are ahead of it. And in a way, of course he does, because he came here with nothing and this country has given him so much. But you never feel like that at the moment. You never feel like that interviewing anyone in public life, really. And I think it's a very kind of wonderful thing to see in action.
Brilliant. Well, James has stayed studiously silent, but that's because he knows in the back of his head that it's the James Marriott section of
and I think that
show.
one of the people who has diagnosed the problem best is the Times writer James Marriott.
Who was that mystery man?
A man of great judgment, I think we can all agree.
Bigging you up. It's the man who created 1 million neats, Michael Gove, James Marriott's biggest fan. Now, your column today is on the art and decline of casual conversation. And I said to you before we went on air, and I can't resist saying it, it's a wonderfully grumpy column. Explain your gripe.
I would say that the fault is not with me; it's with reality. As an opinion columnist, you look around every single week thinking, "What can I write about?" I saw this fascinating study, and genuinely, this is the sort of thing that always interests me. Scientists at an American university have been tracking how many words we speak to each other every day, and it has fallen off a cliff. Between 2005 and 2019, the number of words we speak every single day has dropped from about 16,000 to something like 11,000. That's a steep decline. That's 2019, before the pandemic, before working from home, before the automation of lots of cafes. Tell me the positive take on that. I don't think there is really one. Well, it just seems sad to me.
Well, I mean, your column is a great column because it made me think, that's the art of the columnist, the art of the great interview. And so I didn't agree with some of it, but that's a good thing. So, for example, you say that America is very divided because people live in different communities. But the thing about America is they talk all the time. You go into a restaurant and they just bombard you with questions. How was your day? How are things? And we're British, James. We just want to say, please shut up, but we're too polite to say that. We don't like talking in Britain.
That is true. I mean, I guess the really frightening thing about this study is that it was done on Americans. Okay. So if that's how little Americans are talking with their, I agree, somewhat grating capacity to be overly voluble, what on earth has happened in Britain? We've probably gone from about 23 to sort of 6 or something words per day. And I mean, the sort of wider point I was making in the column, which I do believe in, and I do think, okay, it is a bit grumpy, but again, tech is transforming our lives, and we've got to think very carefully about the society that is being given to us by Silicon Valley, which is that people are just talking to each other a lot less. And we know historically that one of the great forces of a tolerant liberal society is, as I say in the piece, urbanization. At the end of the 18th century, especially in the 19th century, cities grew bigger. More and more diverse kinds of people were thrown together to live on top of one another. They had to talk to each other, and this is the environment from which liberalism emerges. This is the environment from which a tolerant modern society emerges. One in which you're exposed every day through going to the shops, taking a taxi, talking to your waiter in a restaurant. You're just exposed to a diversity of different kinds of people. And if tech returns us to the kinds of silos that we lived in when we were much more geographically isolated, living in hamlets and villages before the great age of urbanization, I'm not necessarily sure we should expect tolerant and liberal attitudes to survive it. So I think that is just true, and I know it is a bit grumpy, but the positive case for all sitting at home on our phones and ordering Deliveroos over an app and not talking to anyone. I mean, I can't do it.
James is fighting this campaign, and he started by talking to his Uber driver. Charlotte, you're a great talker, but do you talk to strangers? I mean, I talk to waiters, and
no.
Exactly. That's welcome to my family. Welcome to my family. You know, that's the point. People think it's awful. I say, how are you? You know, are you at university? And people are just literally falling under the table. So I'm trying to be James Marriott, I think, but people hate it.
Yeah, I don't really talk to people. People talk to me. I've got one of those faces that sort of says, yeah, come on, bring me your mad people, bring me your problems, and I will indulge this. And I've sort of...
So you're minding your own business and random...
It's got better over the years since I moved to London and sort of trained my face into a kind of hard look of contempt for everyone around me. But now, having read James's column, I'm sort of thinking maybe for the public good, I ought to bring back that clearly kind of... I think maybe it's from being from quite a small town. You get this sort of openness to people chatting to you, and then you move to a city and it sort of follows you.
I mean, we could go on for hours, and we talked so much that we almost run out of time, and I want to cover your grumpy column, Charlotte Ivers. Yours is about the BBC cuts. We're getting the BBC we deserve. We've lost blankety blank, but you're much more concerned about the loss of news and factual programming. And I have a lot of sympathy with what you said, even though I think your column's grumpy, but grumpy in a good way.
Thank you very much. Yes. Well, the BBC is making huge cuts all over the place, largely driven by the fact that a lot more people aren't paying their licence fee because of a massive divergence in the way that we consume television. And there was some data last week that showed Netflix just pulling equal or just ahead of the BBC in terms of what people first turn to when they're looking for something on TV, and obviously all of the momentum is in with Netflix. So there are worried people at the BBC, all sorts of cuts to light entertainment, but cuts to factual as well. And some of those cuts, I think, are a bit bleak. They've got no South America correspondent anymore. Yes. So the whole great continent of South America, nobody covering that now. They're merging various different shows. They're getting rid of Moneybox, they're getting rid of The Inquiry, I think, various other factual shows. They are merging the Newsnight team, which has already been cut to the bone and turned into this sort of terrible kind of people from social media fighting chat show when it used to be a source of great investigative journalism. And it is just sort of a bit heartbreaking. And there's always this temptation to bash the BBC, and it's so easy. But the argument I make in the column is actually I'm diagnosing a similar problem to the one James is, which is it's all social media's fault again, which is we get the BBC we deserve. If we were all interested in South America and we were all clicking on stories about South America, the BBC would have a correspondent there. there. But they are trying to compete with us scrolling dead-eyed through our phones, which is why we get content that is dumbed down. It's why we don't get big long-form interviews anymore. We get lots of little clips. And what are we to expect, really? They are. You could make the case that they should be holier than thou and purer and not trying to compete with these things because they are a special publicly funded thing. But what are they going to do when they look at their numbers crashing? They're going to chase our eyeballs, and our eyeballs aren't going anywhere good.
I know. There has to be a sort of happy compromise. I mean, Times Radio and the Times obviously competes to a certain extent with the BBC, but I think, it's public service broadcasting. And what really struck me about the column was, not having a Latin American correspondent. That's a dereliction, James, of public service broadcasting.
True, but I do think Charlotte's right. And the thing is, you can have this pure holier than thou BBC, which is only people reporting on minor corruption scandals in Latin America, which is watched by nobody, or you can have a BBC that attempts to appeal to a wide audience that can piggyback in a bit of serious news that people actually see. And I think probably the calculation has to be that one, and it's not one that it's not one that looks very attractive, and it's not one that a lot of people are going to feel particularly happy making a case for. But I think you want serious news that people watch rather than very serious news that absolutely nobody sees. But yeah, I mean, it is a tragedy.
Well, I would push it back on the BBC and say make it interesting. I mean, Argentina, could invade the Falklands again, and they won't have a South American correspondent.
I'm sceptical. I think some stuff, the stuff that's good for you, often has to be forced on you a little bit, and you can't necessarily be expected to find it interesting. My personal thesis for what all needs to happen is that every fifth or every third TikTok video should be educational and 10 minutes long, and you shouldn't be able to scroll on until you've watched someone explain Latin America, art history, what's going on in your local area with the local government, and they should just force TikTok to do that.
You could be the face of this. It could be a sort of dystopian Big Brother, James Marriott's face appears on your phone.
Everybody's heart sinks.
Yes, and another thing about Derrida. Yes.
But I mean, that was basically...
I love it.
But this is what the BBC was doing in the when it started in the 20s and 30s. They were forcing people to listen to worthy stuff, and we've got to bring that back.
It's gone full circle back to full grumpiness. We've gone from James
That's an optimistic vision for the future.
Talk more, Charlotte fed up with the BBC, to James now saying that we must basically go back to the home service.
Of course.
I mean, you've come from another age, James. We are honoured to have you in the 21st century, is all I can say. Charlotte Ivers and James Marriott, you've been a delight, and I'm so sorry, Charlotte, we didn't get onto your excellent column looking at how we're going to be eating more octopuses, because apparently they are invading our seas thanks to climate change. But you've both been absolutely delightful guests. This is Ed Vaizey on Time.